Hello everyone, it's Karen and welcome to another video. Today we're going to do an album review, and judging by the shirt I'm wearing, it's going to be a Beatles review. Yes, it is. And today I'm going to be reviewing the album Beatles for Sale, which celebrates its 60th anniversary tomorrow. So in this video I'm just going to go over a bit of background about the album, show you my copies of the album, go over each track individually, and just give the marking as a whole, a marking out of 10. So Beatles for Sale was the Beatles' fourth studio album, released on the 4th of December in 1964 on Parlophone, of course. By this point in time, Beatlemania was really in, the country was gripped by Beatlemania by this point, both in America and in the UK. And they had been in '64 had been a very, very busy, hectic year for the Beatles, much like what 1963 had been the previous year. They'd been to America in the February and appeared on the Ed Sullivan Show. They had the film A Hard Day's Night, and of course the subsequent album as well. And they'd also been touring, of course, in all sorts of countries, not just America and the UK, but also they've been to New Zealand, Australia, and they've been to Hong Kong as well in the June of '64. And then, of course, Hard Day's Night film came out as well. They had started to record the album in the August. They'd also been to Sweden as well at this point as well. But they'd been into Sweden in '63 as well. They'd started recording the album in August, but then a week later, recording was disrupted because the Beatles went on tour on America for a big month tour across the country. And during this tour, they met Bob Dylan, who was becoming a folk rock artist, and the Beatles were very much influenced and inspired by Bob Dylan, and there's a bit of a Dylan influence on this this album, as we'll touch upon in just a moment. The tour in America kind of lasted for about a month, and then after September they were back in the studio recording the album, and then they had to kind of work around their schedule because they had a UK tour in the October and November of '64. So the Beatles very much recorded it on the base of a hectic UK tour. And Neil Aspinall, who was their road manager, would recall no band today would come off a long US tour at the end of September, go into the studio with a new album, still writing songs, then go on a UK tour and finish the album in 5 weeks, still touring and have the album out in time for Christmas, much like what they had with the Beatles in 1963. Nobody else would have done that, but that's what the Beatles did at the end of 1964. But the album, it was apparent at this point that Beatlemania was starting to kind of take its toll on the Beatles, because when you think about it, the last year, 63 to 64, they were like going all over the country, the UK in 1963, and then from 63 they went to, and then from 64 it was like France, America, Australia, New Zealand, Hong Kong, Sweden, America, and then back to their country, the UK. So they were pretty much zigzagging, appearing on radio and television as well. So it was pretty much, their 64 schedule was very, very hectic. And George Martin, their producer, would then recall, they were rather war-weary during Beatles for Sale. One must have remembered that they'd battered like mad throughout 1964 and much of 1963. Success is a wonderful thing, but it's very tiring. The album came out on December 1964, December 4th, 1964. And it appeared at number 1 in the UK charts and got good reviews, I would say, like all the Beatles' albums probably would at that point. And yeah, it's a pretty good album, I would say, even despite the kind of fact that Beatlemania was taking its toll. It's still a really good album, I would say. And we're going to show you my copies of the album now. So here's my original mono copy, which is an original pressing. I believe it's a first, but I don't know for sure. There's the back of it. It's a gatefold, the Beatles' first gatefold album. There had been gatefold albums in the past, like Elvis Is Back and Elvis' Christmas album, but the Beatles gave their gatefolds for this album. I don't know, the date with the Everly Brothers as well had also been a gatefold, but this was the first time the Beatles had a gatefold album. There's the songs there. And of course they would have gatefold albums with things like Sgt. Pepper and the White Album and Magical Mystery Tour as well, but this was the first time they had it. And the LP, unlike normal records normally come out of this side, the record comes out of this side, the centre. And here's the record itself in its original sleeve, and we are on Parlophone, like the usual albums up to this point. So yeah, that's the mono copy. So there's that one. I also have a stereo copy, which is a bit of a cover difference. It's a bit brighter in colour than the mono, the stereo cover. You can see by the back as well. Again, I must say, a great cover, which is taken by Robert Freeman, who also took the with the Beatles cover. So this is a stereo copy. It's a later pressing from the 70s, but it's on the silver and black Parlophone label. I got this this record on eBay about 11 years ago, 2013, when I was kind of getting into vinyl and getting into the Beatles as well. And I got the mono copy in a job lot on eBay with a mono Please Please Me, silver stereo Sgt. Pepper, an Apple pressing of the Beatles' second album. So yeah. And this one in America, Beats for Sale came out under this one, Beatles 65, but they used 8 of the album's songs, and they also threw in I'll Be Back, which is from the Hard Day's Night album, the UK Hard Day's Night, and the single that had just come out at that point, which was I Feel Fine and She's a Woman. So it was almost Beatles for Sale bar a few tracks, and omitted 6 as well. This copy is a I think in the late 60s, a German pressing, but it originally came out on Capitol in America. It's on the Odeon label, this release. And also the remaining tracks came out on this album, Beatles 6, in 1965. This has a few of the covers and a few of the originals that weren't on the Beatles 65 one. This copy is a late 70s Canadian pressing on the Purple Capitol label. Still really nice to have that one. I've also got the album on CD as well. In the this one, this is the Stereo 2009 remaster from the Stereo CD box set. That's the back. You open it up like this, and the CD comes out like that, and it's on the old Parlophone label. And here is the booklet. And the booklets in these like remasters, the Stereo 2009 remasters, they're really good because you get a lot of unseen photographs. You get the album's original liner notes, you know, for the ones that had the liner notes, and loads of pictures of them, and the great pictures of them in the studio, and even on tour as well. So there's loads of like really good photos in these booklets, and even get the historical notes as well, and tells you where each picture was taken as well, and when, and even on historical notes about what the Beatles were up to, and just kind of the general kind of pop music and what was happening at this point, and even the recording processes as well. So yeah, and this was the Beatles' second album to be made on 4-track. They had been experimenting with 2-track with Please Please Me and With the Beatles, and then during October 1963 they moved to 4-track where they recorded the Hard Day's Night album, and they continued with 4-track on Beatles for Sale. And here's the mono 2009 version. This is very similar to the mono vinyl, just a bit smaller. There it is. Pack is very similar as well. My copy's not a legit version from the mono box. Mono box is not legit, unfortunately, but you know what, it's still nice to have the albums in mono CD as well. But it does, however, look like a legit box, so yeah, I've got to give that credit there. So yeah, there's that one. Really nice to get that one. Now we're going to go over all the... Whoops. Now we're going to go over all the album's tracks. So we start the album off with No Reply, which is a great way to start off the album. I really like the way John starts the song with "This happened once before," and this song is kind of about a guy who's trying to get hold of his apparently unfaithful girlfriend, although he knows that she's at home. In the 1980 interview, John Lennon recalled that the song was inspired by a song called "Silhouettes" by a doo-wop group called The Rage, which I think was later a hit for Herman's Hermits as well. And it's a really good song. I really like this one, and even contains piano part played by the producer George Martin. Paul and John share the vocals on this one. John does kind of takes the lead, but Paul, however, kind of takes occasionally as well. But George, I think, joins in on the chorus as well, and they all supply hand claps as well. So it's a good way to start off the album. I'm having to read the tracks off the CD because they're not printed on the back of the album, so I'm going to have to read the tracks from the CD whilst holding the the vinyl. So that's how I'm kind of knowing what the tracks are. Then we get I'm a Loser. I'm a Loser is a really great one. It's almost kind of like described by many as kind of autobiographical, and John has said in interviews that this was him in his Dylan period, because as I said earlier, the Beatles had met Bob Dylan in 1964 during their American tour, and he kind of had an influence on the Beatles on this album. This is very kind of Dylan-esque song, to say the least, and it's basically kind of, it's one of the very first Beatle compositions to kind of address the more serious points in Young Love. It's kind of like it's almost like a treated theme in his writing, in which the song serves as a personal response to fame. And other examples include Help, I'm Only Sleeping, and whatnot in later years. But yeah, I really like I'm a Loser. It's a really great one, and it mainly John does it, but Paul kind of joins in with the song as well. So yeah, a really good one. Then we get Babies in Black. Babies in Black is the one that John and Paul sing, and I really like the kind of vocals. And this is one that the Beatles did on their 1965 American tour. And it's, I really quite like the lyrics and George's guitar with the twanging. It's very kind of country effect to it. This is very kind of, there's some songs that have that very kind of country music kind of influence, which the Beatles probably all really liked country music. I really like the John's lyrics of oh dear, what can I do? Baby's in black and I'm feeling blue. Oh, how long the mistake she has made. And Babies in Black, of course, was performed in the 65 US tour, and there's a version on the Live at the Hollywood Bowl re-release from 2016. But it also appeared as the B-side of Real Love as well, the single Real Love in 1996. So, yeah. Then we get Rock and Roll Music, which is the first of 6 covers in this album. And Rock and Roll Music was by Chuck Berry, who, of course, John Lennon particularly, the Beatles all really liked Chuck Berry, and were influenced by Chuck. This one's sung by John. I really like John's way, and George Martin plays the piano in it as well, which is really great. And I really like the just let me hear some of that rock. And it's really kind of up-tempo and fast, which I really quite like. And the Beatles played this song to open their final tour in 1966 in Germany, Japan, and even America. So yeah, it was a good one to open with. And yeah, a really great one, Rock and Roll Music. One that the Beatles had... they might have played this one, you know, in their early Hamburg shows, in the early Hamburg days. So this, like I say, a lot of the covers the Beatles picked for their first few albums were ones that they had played in the Cavern and even Hamburg, and even played on BBC Radio in the 1960s as well. So yeah, Rock and Roll Music, great cover version. And I really like the Beatles. I think I'd say I like the Beatles version more than Chuck Berry's, but still, really, really good version. Then we get I'll Follow the Sun. I'll Follow the Sun had been a song that was a very early song. It was probably the earliest song in the album. Paul had written it in his front parlour in Forthland Road when he was about 16. So it was so about 1958 Paul wrote the song, so very early one. And Paul sings the song really nicely with the guitar, acoustic guitar, and John harmonises with Paul as well on the kind of "and so the time has come" line. So yeah, a really kind of nice song, and it's one that Paul, I think, did live at Glastonbury in 2004 as well. So yeah, and George does a really nice kind of slide guitar solo, and Ringo does percussion, where people have stated that it's Ringo kind of tapping his hands and his knees, which was a similar thing for Buddy Holly's Every Day. The drummer, I think it was Jerry Allison, who was Buddy Holly's drummer, tapping his thighs. I'm not sure who Buddy Holly's drummer was. I'll need to try and look it up again. But anyway, Jeff Emerick, who was the session's tape operator and later Beatles engineer, a microphone was placed between Starr's legs, and as he tapped on them with an EQ boosting the control to give a sound of a greater depth. And yeah, really nice song, I'll Follow the Sun. Probably my favourite McCartney compositions. Then we get Mr. Moonlight. Mr. Moonlight was originally a song by a guy called Roy Lee Johnson. And this was a song that the Beatles had done at the Hamburg Star Club in December 1962. You can hear it on the Live from the Star Club in Hamburg 1962 live album. And a lot of Beatles fans don't like this song. And I can't really understand why, because I personally quite like it. This was the one of the earliest ones to have been recorded, as was I'm a Loser, in August 1964, alongside I'm a Loser. And it was also, another song was also recorded called Leave My Kitten Alone as well, which never made the album and wouldn't be released till the anthology album. And the Beatles did a re-recording of this in October on the day off from their UK tour. And the track features George Harrison on African drum, and it also featured Ringo doing percussion as well. And Paul was even on Hammond organ as well. And John really kind of takes the lead, but George and Paul kind of back up John on this one. But yeah, I really like quite like Mr. Moonlight. It's it's one I do enjoy as well. I know a lot of Beatles fans don't like this song, but I like it. Sorry to all you Beatles fans who I may have offended by saying that, but no, I like John's vocal. Then we get Kansas City, Hey 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 Hey, which is a medley of 2 Little Richard songs sung by Paul McCartney. And the Beatles were all like Little Richard and Chuck Berry fans. And they had done this as far back as 1962 in the Cavern Club days, but they also done it in Hamburg as well, and they'd also played it on the Live at the BBC in like 1963 and 64 before this album's release, and you can even hear versions on the Live at the BBC albums and even in some of the bootleg recordings. But yeah, I really like the way the guitar starts, the way it kind of starts the song off, and then it goes into a solo, and then Paul does the hey, 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 and that's when it changes the song. So yeah, great one there from the Beatles, Kansas City, Hey, 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 which is Paul McCartney, but Little Richard cover. But yeah, really like that song, really like that. Then we turn it over to side 2, where we get 8 Days a Week. This is one that Paul and John sing, and Paul's kind of said that the inspiration behind the song came when he was getting a taxi over to John's house, because Paul had been stopped for speeding, or he'd had his license suspended for speeding, and he was talking to the chauffeur, and he's like, oh, how many days do you work? And the chauffeur's like, oh, I work 8 days a week. And then that gave Paul the idea for a song title, and went over to John's house and said, I've got a title for a new song. And that was how it started. It was 8 Days a Week. And I really like the lyrics, vocals, guitars, and the single, however, the song was never a single in the UK, but was a single in America on the Capitol label. But it has appeared on compilations like the Beatles #1 album and the Red Album, 1962 to 66 album. So it has had like a fan favourite within the Beatles fandom, even if it wasn't a single. And even Paul McCartney has played this song live through the years as well. And so yeah, 8 Days a Week's a great one, and a good way to start the album, the other side of the album on. Then we get Words of Love. Words of Love was originally a Buddy Holly song. This is one that John and Paul sing. And this is the Beatles had originally sang this on the Live at the BBC. But originally, before the big break, John and George had kind of harmonised, had sang this song together. But then Paul kind of got it for the official, when he did it in the studio. And they also did it on the Live at the BBC Volume 2 album, which is a version from the Pop Go the Beatles radio show on the BBC Like programme in August 1963. So it had existed as far back as then, or at least, but Paul, John and George also kind of harmonised with this song, and yeah, it's a really, really, really kind of nice version. Almost very similar to the original, I would say. But yeah, really like that both versions of Words of Love from the Buddy Holly. And Buddy Holly was, of course, a big influence on the Beatles, particularly Paul McCartney. Paul McCartney, I think, has said that Buddy Holly was a very big influence on them. Then we get Honey Don't. Honey Don't was Carl Perkins, and the Beatles all loved Carl Perkins, who had a hit with Blue Suede Shoes, and this is one of his other hits, Honey Don't. But they had also recorded Matchbox on the Long Tall Sally EP earlier in the year, sung by Ringo, and much like this one, Honey Don't is sung by Ringo, and very kind of country style a bit, and but the song had actually been sung by John, and there are versions live at the BBC sung by John from 1963, but then sang it on a 1964 radio session until handing over the song to Ringo in 64. So yeah, Ringo takes the lead vocal in this one, and George has a good guitar solo, and even like Ringo says, "Rock on, George!" and then George plays his solo, and yeah, really good version of Honey Don't from Ringo, and Ringo does a good vocal rendition of it. Even though people say, oh, you know, Ringo doesn't really, he's not probably the greatest of the Beatles singers, but I think he's a good vocalist, is Ringo. And so yeah, there we are, Honey Don't. Then we get Every Little Thing. Every Little Thing's a nice song that's sung by John and Paul. I really like the kind of guitars on the track, and the vocals, and the harmony as well. And Paul had said that this song was written in the music room of his London home of his then girlfriend Jane Asher, who he was living with at the time. And John then said in 1980 that Paul wrote the song, although he mentioned he might have thrown something in. It's been author John Wynne said that Paul had began the song in London, and then him and John finished it in Atlantic City in America during their tour. And yeah, they both kind of sing on this one, harmony on this one, Paul and John, in the chorus at least. But Every Little Thing though is a great track, and it got and even made it on the Beatles' Love Song compilation in 1977, so yeah, it must have been that good for the record company to put it on there, so yeah. Then we get I Don't Want to Spoil the Party. This kind of country Everly Brothers influenced song. Paul and John sing this song. I really like this song. Basically the lyrics are about, it's kind of, the lyrics anticipate the themes to become similar in Lennon's songwriting, alienation and kind of inner pain. And this song, the narrator's at a party waiting for his girl to show up, but when it's become clear that she stood him up, he decides to leave rather than spoil everyone's fun. But yeah, it's a great lyrics from John, and I really like the song. And George Harrison's guitar on this was put on a new Gretsch guitar he'd got, which is very much in the style of Carl Perkins, which was enhanced by a mid-range Reynolds boost, giving it an especially bright sound. And this was kind of described as country rock, anticipating the Byrds working that style. This was the B-side of 8 Days a Week in America. And yeah, it's a song I really like. I Don't Want to Spoil the Party. Probably one of my favourite Beatle tracks from this album, I would say. Then we get What You're Doing. This is one that's sung by Paul. What You're Doing is a good song. It's one I quite like. It was written in Atlantic City by Paul during their US tour. And John kind of added it as well. And it was inspired by his girlfriend Jane Asher again. McCartney's gone on record saying that he wasn't liking What You're Doing, regarding it as a bit of filler from the album, which probably perhaps is quite true because they've never really done the song. They've never done it live in the years. Or like the guitar riff played by George, which was played on Rickenbacker 12-string, which was an instrument that the Byrds would later use. A similar riff on their version of Mr. Tambourine Man from Bob Dylan, and George would later use that kind of adopted influence on If I Needed Someone in the Rubber Soul album as well. So yeah, yeah, I really like that. I quite like the song What You're Doing, but yeah, it's not one that I would maybe play outside the album, but still a good song. Then we get Everybody's Trying to Be My Baby, the last track on the album, which is another Carl Perkins one, but this time sung by George. Yeah, I really quite like this one. This is one that the Beatles had played in Hamburg in December 1962 on the Star Club. And they had played it on the BBC, live at the BBC in 1963 on the Pop Go The Beatles show, before it came out on Beatles for Sale. But they also played the song live as well. They played it live on the 1965 tour, and the version from the Shea Stadium show was on the Anthology 2 album. And George later played the song with Carl Perkins on a Cinemax special, Blue Suede Shoes, a Rockabilly session. And even Bruce Springsteen is said to have played the song live after Carl Perkins' passing. And Johnny Cash did a version in the mid-90s with Tom Petty and the Heartbreakers backing him, which was on the Unearthed, which I've just seen here. So yeah, it's been covered quite a few times. Sung by George, and George Harrison, I think, he'd said that he loved Carl Perkins in interviews, so yeah, that's the other Carl Perkins song they've done on here. They've covered quite a few Carl songs, but anyway, I quite like the guitar, George's guitar and his vocal on it, and really like the kind of solo bit in the middle that George does, and so yeah, a really good way to end the album, I would say. Everybody's Trying to Be My Baby. So that's the album as a whole. Beatles for Out of Sale gets a 9 out of 10. For me, it's a good album. It was an album that I said I played the least, but I played it again a few days later. I actually found I quite enjoyed it. I still do quite enjoy it, I would say. But yeah, it's kind of obvious that Beatlemania was starting to take a toll on the Beatles at this point, and you know, this was like the first signs that things were kind of starting to get to them a bit. And you know, there was the anthology documentary. They said they never really had a day off, and they would often complain to Brian, Epstein, their manager, that we've got to have a day off, but that never really happened. But yeah, I hope you all enjoyed this video, and you know, and like, comment, subscribe, and that's another Beatles anniversary recorded. We're going to do the next anniversary will be the Help album, which will be in August next year, August 2025. So we're going to do a video for that as well, like we've been doing for like the first 4 albums. So yeah, we're going to kind of continue the anniversary trend up until Let It Be. So yeah, it's hard to believe that the Beatles albums are now kind of 60 years old. You know, they don't. To me, they don't sound like they're 60-year-old albums, but they still sound, you know, as fresh as they probably did back then. They're like different to a lot of things you get today. But anyways, hope you all enjoyed this video. Like, comment, subscribe, and we'll see you again for the next video. Until then, bye just now.